Idiot threatens black lady judge, then gets stuck inside courtroom. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as the morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden streaks onto the polished wooden floors. Judge Monica Hayes sat at the bench, her presence commanding yet serene. Known for her sharp mind and unwavering sense of justice, Monica had presided over countless high-profile cases. Yet, as she reviewed the docket for the day, a name stood out like a sore thumb: Jason Marlowe. Jason Marlowe, a tech prodigy turned criminal mastermind, or so he fancied himself, was scheduled for sentencing that day. At just 27, Jason had built a reputation not just for his cutting-edge skills in cybersecurity, but also for his disdain for authority. He had hacked into corporate systems, stolen millions in data breaches, and created chaos wherever his ego led him. Today, however, the law would have the final say. The courtroom door swung open, and Jason entered with a swagger that seemed almost choreographed. Dressed in a sharp navy suit that screamed arrogance rather than professionalism, he scanned the room as if he were the star of a grand show. His eyes sparkled with mischief, his smirk bordered on insolence, and every movement was calculated to exude confidence. For Jason, this wasn't a sentencing, it was an opportunity to perform. "Good morning, Your Honor," Jason said, his voice smooth but laced with mockery. "I trust you're well rested for the big event?" Judge Hayes glanced up from her notes, her expression unreadable. "Good morning, Mr. Marlowe. I trust you understand the seriousness of today's proceedings." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Jason replied, flashing a grin that made the spectators shift uncomfortably in their seats. "But let's be honest, Judge, this is all just a formality. You'll hand down your sentence, and I'll be out of here before lunchtime." The air in the courtroom grew tense. A few reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, sensing a headline-worthy confrontation brewing. Monica, however, remained unruffled. She had seen his type before, arrogant, entitled, and utterly convinced of their invincibility. But something about Jason was different. His overconfidence hinted at a plan, a hidden ace up his sleeve. "Mr. Marlowe," Monica said, her voice firm but calm, "I suggest you save your theatrics for another audience. This courtroom operates on facts and the law, not spectacle." Jason chuckled, leaning back in his chair as if she told a joke. "Facts and the law? That's adorable. But let's not kid ourselves. You might think you have control here, but you don't." The crowd murmured at his audacity. Even his lawyer, an aging man who seemed as tired as his wrinkled suit, looked like he wanted to crawl under the defense table. Jason thrived on the attention, basking in the collective shock of the room. Monica folded her hands and studied him. "It seems you're under the impression that this is a game." "Life is a game, Judge," Jason quipped, his grin widening. "And I'm very, very good at it." Unbeknownst to Jason, Monica's years on the bench had taught her to look beyond words. She noticed how his hand lingered in his pocket, how his eyes flicked briefly toward the doors. It was subtle, but it was there. Jason had a plan. The thought didn't unnerve her. If anything, it strengthened her resolve. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, her tone steady, "you've been convicted of multiple felonies, including hacking into federal databases and defrauding numerous corporations. These are serious crimes with real consequences." Jason shrugged. "Consequences are for people who get caught. You are caught," Monica reminded him, her voice razor-sharp. Jason leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Am I?" The cryptic statement sent a ripple through the room. Monica could feel the weight of every eye on her, waiting for her response. But instead of reacting, she simply gave a slight nod to the bailiff. The subtle motion wasn't lost on Jason, whose smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Outside the courtroom, security was tighter than usual. Monica had insisted on it after reading Jason's file. He had a history of manipulating people and systems, turning vulnerabilities into opportunities. Today, there would be none of that. Unknown to Jason, every aspect of the courtroom's security had been upgraded: locks, cameras, and even the building's Wi-Fi. Monica wasn't just relying on protocol, she had taken matters into her own hands. As the proceedings began, Jason maintained his showman's facade. He interrupted his attorney, made flippant remarks, and occasionally shot glances at the judge as if daring her to react. The prosecution presented a damning case, listing Jason's crimes in meticulous detail. Yet, instead of showing remorse, Jason yawned theatrically. When it was the defense's turn, Jason's lawyer attempted a last-ditch appeal for leniency, citing his client's potential for rehabilitation. Jason, however, couldn't resist chiming in. "Potential? Please," he said, laughing. "I'm already a success story." The crowd gasped. Even the seasoned prosecutor looked taken aback by his audacity. Monica, however, remained composed. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, cutting through the noise, "you seem to be under the impression that arrogance will serve you well here. Let me assure you, it won't." Jason clapped his hands slowly, mock applause echoing in the chamber. "Bravo, Judge. Bravo. But let's see how long that confidence lasts." Monica's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat, Mr. Marlowe?" "Not at all," Jason replied, his grin returning. "Just a prediction." As the day wore on, Jason's confidence seemed unshakable. He made cryptic remarks, dropped vague hints about the futility of the court's power, and even winked at a reporter in the front row. His antics were infuriating, but Monica refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. By the time closing arguments concluded, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Jason's attorney slumped in his chair, looking defeated. The prosecutor stared daggers at Jason, who seemed to be having the time of his life. Monica prepared her notes, her mind running through the sentence she was about to deliver. But as she glanced at Jason one last time, she caught the faintest flicker of his eyes toward the courtroom doors. She knew. Jason had a plan, and he thought it was foolproof. But Monica had dealt with masterminds before. She had seen overconfidence crumble under the weight of the law. And she was ready. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, her voice steady, "your antics today have been noted. But rest assured, the law operates on facts, not your theatrics." Jason's grin widened. "We'll see about that." As she prepared to deliver her sentence, Monica felt the weight of the moment. Jason's arrogance wasn't just a personal affront, it was a challenge to the very system she had dedicated her life to upholding. But she wasn't worried. The courtroom was her domain. And Jason Marlowe was about to learn that in Monica Hayes' courtroom, no one played the game better than the judge. The courtroom quieted as Judge Monica Hayes leaned forward slightly, her steely gaze fixed on Jason Marlowe. His smug grin only widened in response, as if her scrutiny amused him. He sat back in his chair, adjusting his cuffs like a man attending a casual business meeting rather than a sentencing for multiple federal crimes. "Mr. Marlowe," Monica began, her tone even and controlled, "you seem very confident. Too confident, considering the gravity of your crimes." Jason chuckled softly, leaning forward. "Well, Your Honor, confidence is the product of preparation, isn't it? And let's just say, I'm very prepared." His cryptic statement hung in the air, the tension palpable. Spectators exchanged glances, and even the bailiff standing by the door seemed to shift uneasily. Jason's words weren't simply the bravado of a guilty man. There was something unnerving in his certainty. Monica's years of experience had taught her to remain unflappable in the face of defiance. She had seen hardened criminals, cartel bosses, and white-collar schemers all attempt to manipulate the courtroom. Jason, however, was different. His arrogance wasn't born from brute force or desperation but from his belief that he was the smartest person in the room. She adjusted her glasses and continued. "Mr. Marlowe, you stand convicted of 23 counts, including hacking into federal systems, financial fraud, and tampering with classified databases. These crimes have caused irreparable harm to individuals and institutions alike. Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Jason raised a finger, his grin unwavering. "Actually, Judge, I do. I'd like to say that life is about taking risks. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But the trick is knowing how to change the game before it ends." Monica arched an eyebrow. "An interesting philosophy. However, this courtroom is not a game. Of course it is, Jason replied, his voice smooth. Everything's a game when you think about it. Rules, players, strategies. It's all about who's better at bending the rules without breaking them. His words earned a low murmur from the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing the drama building. Jason, ever the performer, looked around the room as if soaking in the attention. But Monica's expression remained unreadable. Your confidence is noted, Mr. Marlowe, she said, her voice like steel. But let me assure you, the law doesn't bend to arrogance. Jason leaned back in his chair, smirking. We'll see about that. The room grew tense again, but Monica refused to let it rattle her. She had anticipated Jason's bravado long before he stepped into her courtroom. Reviewing his file, she had discovered a pattern of manipulation and evasion. Jason didn't just hack systems, he hacked people, exploiting their weaknesses to gain the upper hand. His demeanor today confirmed that he thought the law was just another system he could manipulate. But Monica had prepared. Months before, she had upgraded the courtroom's security infrastructure. The locks, cameras, and even the courtroom's Wi-Fi network were now integrated into a cutting-edge system designed to thwart cyber intrusions. While she didn't know exactly what Jason had planned, she was certain he would try something. The fact that his hand had lingered in his pocket earlier only confirmed her suspicions. Jason's lawyer, visibly exasperated, cleared his throat and stood. Your Honor, if I may. You may not, Monica interrupted, her tone clipped. Your client's behavior speaks for itself. Sit down, Mr. Layton. Jason laughed as his lawyer sank back into his chair, muttering under his breath. Tough crowd, Jason quipped. But I like a challenge. Monica leaned back slightly, folding her hands. Mr. Marlowe, I've presided over cases involving individuals who believed they were untouchable. They, too, thought their intelligence or influence would shield them from accountability. You are not the first. And yet, Jason said, tilting his head, here I am, unlike anyone you've dealt with before. His smirk faltered for a brief moment, as Monica's gaze bore into him. You believe you're special. That's evident. But let me be clear, no amount of preparation, no clever schemes, will exempt you from facing the consequences of your actions. Jason didn't respond immediately. For a moment, it seemed as if her words had struck a nerve. But then he grinned again, a glint of something darker in his eyes. You know, Judge, I almost admire you. You're calm under pressure. But the thing is, pressure eventually cracks everything. The bailiff stepped forward slightly, sensing the subtle escalation in Jason's tone. Monica raised a hand, signaling him to stand down. I assure you, Mr. Marlowe, Monica said, her voice unwavering. I don't crack. Jason chuckled softly, tapping his fingers on the table. We'll see. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Monica refused to let it faze her. She had dealt with men like Jason before, people who thrived on control and manipulation. But there was something unsettling in his demeanor, something that hinted at a hidden plan. Monica had learned to trust her instincts, and they were screaming at her now. Bailiff, she said, her tone calm but firm. Ensure all courtroom systems remain operational throughout these proceedings. The bailiff nodded and stepped toward the control panel at the back of the room. Jason's smirk faltered for the briefest moment before he regained his composure. Monica saw it and knew her suspicions were correct. Jason had a plan, and whatever it was, he thought it was foolproof. As the sentencing phase began, Monica kept her focus on Jason. His demeanor shifted subtly, his movements were calculated, his attention divided. His hand slipped into his pocket briefly before returning to the table. It was a small, almost imperceptible motion, but Monica caught it. Jason Marlowe thought he had the upper hand. But Monica Hayes knew better. She didn't need to react, not yet. She would wait, let him play his cards. And when he did, she would be ready. Proceed, Monica said, her voice cutting through the silence. The courtroom braced for what was coming. Only Monica knew that the real game had already begun. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet tension as the sentencing proceedings began. The prosecutor delivered a scathing summary of Jason Marlowe's crimes, listing his fraudulent schemes and data breaches that had cost individuals and corporations millions. Jason, however, remained unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern on the table, his smirk ever present. Judge Monica Hayes kept a close eye on him. There was a peculiar energy about Jason today, an arrogance that felt less like bravado and more like anticipation. She had seen defendants like him before, those who believed they could outsmart the system. But Jason didn't just believe it, he seemed certain. "Mr. Marlowe," Monica began, her tone calm but firm. "Your actions have shown a flagrant disregard for the law and for the lives of those you've harmed. The court finds you guilty of all charges and—" Before she could finish, the courtroom lights flickered. A faint but audible click echoed through the room, and the doors leading out of the courtroom locked simultaneously. The sound was subtle but unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the crowd as people glanced around, confused. Jason's grin widened, his fingers still tapping. "Oh dear," he said, feigning surprise. "It seems we have a bit of a technical issue." Monica's eyes narrowed. She glanced at the bailiff, who was already moving toward the control panel at the back of the courtroom. "Check the locks," she ordered, her voice steady. The bailiff tried the doors and shook his head. "They're locked, Your Honor." "All of them?" Jason stood, straightening his jacket. "Well, this is awkward," he said, his tone dripping with mock concern. "I'm sure it's just a coincidence." Monica didn't flinch. "Sit down, Mr. Marlowe." Jason hesitated, clearly enjoying the attention, but eventually returned to his seat. He leaned forward, clasping his hands as if he were the one in charge. "You know, Judge, sometimes things just happen. Technology is so unpredictable." "Is that so?" Monica asked, her tone icy. She locked eyes with him, her sharp gaze cutting through his facade. "Mr. Marlowe, if you think this little stunt is going to help your case, I assure you, it won't." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Stunt? Your Honor, I'm offended. I had nothing to do with this." Monica knew better. The flicker of lights, the synchronized locking of doors, it all pointed to a coordinated attack on the courtroom's systems. And there was only one person in the room capable of pulling it off. She glanced at his hands, which had returned to the table but rested suspiciously close to his pocket. She knew he was hiding something. A device, perhaps? A remote? Whatever it was, he thought it made him untouchable. "You're remarkably composed for someone facing years in federal prison," Monica said, her voice calm. "Most people in your position would be more concerned about the consequences." Jason shrugged, his grin never wavering. "What can I say? I'm an optimist." The bailiff returned, his face pale. "Your Honor, the control panel isn't responding. It's like the entire system has been overridden." "Overridden?" Monica repeated, her gaze snapping back to Jason. "How convenient." Jason raised his hands in mock innocence. "Hey, don't look at me. I'm just a humble defendant." Monica leaned forward, her voice dropping to a cold, measured tone. "Mr. Marlowe, let me make one thing clear. Whatever you think you've done here, it won't work. This courtroom is under my jurisdiction, and I assure you, I am in control." Jason smirked, leaning back once more. "We'll see about that." Unbeknownst to Jason, Monica had anticipated this. After reviewing his file, she'd upgraded the courtroom's security systems, integrating failsafes that could override external tampering. She reached for a hidden switch under her bench, pressing it discreetly. A soft beep sounded from somewhere in the room, and Jason's smirk faltered. The lights steadied, the cameras resumed their rotations, and the doors remained firmly locked. "What's going on?" Jason muttered under his breath, his confidence wavering for the first time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black device no larger than a deck of cards. It had a screen displaying various commands, but it was flashing red. Monica caught the movement and spoke firmly. "Mr. Marlowe, place whatever is in your hand on the table." "Now." Jason hesitated, his smirk gone. For a moment, it seemed as though he might comply, but then he made a fatal mistake. He pressed another button on the device, hoping to regain control. The courtroom's integrated speakers crackled to life. A recorded voice, clear and robotic, rang out. Unauthorized access detected. Countermeasures engaged. Jason's device sparked in his hand, emitting a loud beep before shutting off entirely. He dropped it in shock, the sound of it clattering on the table breaking the heavy silence in the room. Care to explain yourself, Mr. Marlowe? Monica asked, her voice sharp. Jason stammered, his bravado completely gone. I don't know what just happened. Monica leaned back, allowing herself the faintest hint of a smile. You're not as clever as you think, Mr. Marlowe. The courtroom systems were upgraded weeks ago. Whatever you attempted to do has already been neutralized. The crowd murmured, the tension shifting as Jason's facade of control crumbled. Even his attorney, who had been silent for most of the proceedings, buried his head in his hands, clearly mortified by his client's antics. Bailiff, Monica said, her tone crisp. Confiscate that device. And Mr. Marlowe, I hope you realize that tampering with government property will only add to your charges. Jason's face burned red as the bailiff retrieved the smoking device from the table. He slumped back in his chair, his earlier confidence replaced by visible panic. Monica allowed a moment for the room to settle before she spoke again. Mr. Marlowe, you were already facing a significant sentence. But your actions today have demonstrated a complete lack of remorse and respect for the law. Let me assure you, the consequences will reflect that. Jason didn't respond. For the first time, he seemed to grasp the gravity of his situation. The game he thought he was playing had turned against him, and Monica Hayes was the one holding all the cards. The courtroom was deathly silent as Jason Marlowe sat frozen in his chair. The small black device that had been his ticket to freedom now lay smoking on the bailiff's desk, its screen lifeless. His earlier smugness had evaporated, replaced by a pale, tense expression. The once confident hacker realized he'd underestimated not just the courtroom's technology, but also the woman presiding over it. Judge Monica Hayes sat calmly at the bench, her demeanor unshaken by the commotion. Inside, she felt a surge of satisfaction. Jason's little stunt had failed, and now, it was her turn to take control. She glanced briefly at the spectators, who whispered among themselves, eager to see what would happen next. Mr. Marlowe, Monica began, her voice measured and firm. It seems you've managed to add yet another offense to your already lengthy list of crimes. Tampering with government property is a serious matter. Jason's lips parted, but no words came out. He glanced nervously at the bailiff, the device, and then the locked courtroom doors. His mind raced. How had this gone so wrong? His plan had been airtight, or so he thought. He tested the device, ensured its programming was flawless. The courtroom systems should have been easy to override. Yet here he was, trapped and exposed. Jason started, but Monica cut him off. Save it, she said, her tone sharp. Whatever excuses you're about to offer won't help you now. Instead, I'd like to know why you thought this ridiculous scheme would work. Jason shifted uncomfortably, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. I don't know what you mean, Your Honor, he said weakly, trying to salvage some semblance of control. Oh, I think you do, Monica replied, her gaze unwavering. You thought you could outsmart this court, outsmart me. But as you've just learned, arrogance and criminality are a poor combination. The crowd murmured again, some spectators chuckling softly at Jason's predicament. Even his own attorney looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Jason clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as the weight of his failure sank in. Bailiff, Monica said, turning her attention to the officer standing near the locked doors. Unlock the exits and ensure all security measures are operational. I believe the defendant has learned he won't be leaving without my say-so. The bailiff nodded and moved to the control panel. As he pressed a series of buttons, the courtroom speakers announced, Security override deactivated. All systems restored. The doors unlocked with a soft click, and the tension in the room eased slightly. At least for everyone except Jason. Monica returned her focus to the defendant. Now, let's talk about consequences, Mr. Marlowe. Jason's head shot up. Your Honor, I didn't mean for. Stop, Monica said sharply, holding up a hand. Do not insult this court by feigning ignorance. You deliberately brought a device into this courtroom with the intent to tamper with its systems. Your actions disrupted a federal proceeding and endangered everyone here. Jason's lawyer finally spoke up, his voice timid. Your Honor, if I may. You may not, Monica snapped, her tone icy. Your client's actions speak for themselves. The lawyer sank back into his seat, clearly out of his depth. Jason, on the other hand, seemed to regain a sliver of his earlier confidence. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but laced with defiance. You don't understand, Judge. I had to do this. The system is rigged against people like me. Monica's eyebrows lifted slightly. People like you? You mean individuals who exploit others for personal gain? People who believe they're above the law? Jason shook his head. You don't get it. The world isn't fair. It's built to crush people who take risks, who think differently. I was just trying to level the playing field. Level the playing field? Monica repeated, her voice rising. You hacked into government systems, stole millions, and ruined countless lives. That's not leveling the playing field, Mr. Marlowe. That's selfishness disguised as ingenuity. Jason opened his mouth to respond, but Monica wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice steady but commanding. What you don't seem to understand is that actions have consequences. And for someone who claims to be so intelligent, you've made an extraordinary number of foolish choices. The crowd erupted into low murmurs again, some spectators nodding in agreement. Jason's face burned with humiliation, his earlier defiance crumbling under the weight of Monica's words. Here's what's going to happen. Monica continued, her tone firm. Your original sentence will remain intact, 7 years in federal prison. However, for today's stunt, I am adding an additional 3 years for tampering with government property and attempting to obstruct justice. Jason's eyes widened. 3 years? That's fair, Monica interjected. And if you so much as sneeze inappropriately during the rest of this hearing, I'll consider adding more. Jason sat back in his chair, stunned into silence. His lawyer offered a half-hearted protest, but it was clear he had no fight left in him. Monica's word was final. Bailiff, Monica said, standing. Take the defendant into custody immediately. The bailiff moved swiftly, snapping handcuffs onto Jason's wrists. The once arrogant hacker offered no resistance, his head bowed as the reality of his situation sank in. As he was led toward the exit, he paused and glanced back at Monica. You're good, he muttered. I'll give you that. Monica didn't flinch. And you're not as clever as you think, Mr. Marlowe. I suggest you reflect on that during your time in prison. Jason didn't respond. He turned and allowed the bailiff to escort him out, his defeat now complete. The courtroom doors closed behind him with a resounding thud, signaling the end of the proceedings. Monica sat back down and exhaled quietly. Her gaze swept over the room, taking in the relieved expressions of the spectators and the subdued demeanor of the attorneys. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a lesson had been taught. No one, no matter how cunning or arrogant, was above the law. The courtroom buzzed as Jason Marlowe was escorted out in handcuffs. The murmurs among spectators were a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. For the first time, the smug hacker had been outsmarted. But for Judge Monica Hayes, the moment wasn't just about Jason, it was about preserving the integrity of the justice system. She knew his stunt was just the tip of the iceberg. As the doors closed behind Jason, Monica took a moment to address the room. She stood tall, her voice calm but commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, today's proceedings are a reminder that justice is not a game. The law does not bow to arrogance or malice. It stands firm, and it will always prevail. The crowd responded with quiet nods, many now standing to leave. Reporters whispered among themselves, already crafting their headlines. Tech prodigy falls flat in dramatic courtroom showdown. But as the courtroom emptied, Monica's mind stayed focused. Jason's device had been confiscated, but its implications lingered. How many others had he used this on? Had his criminal network gone further than she imagined? She suspected Jason had allies, people who might try to retaliate or continue his schemes. Bailiff, Monica called, motioning him over. Yes, Your Honor? Have the tech team analyzed that device thoroughly? I want a full report on what it was designed to do and any potential connections it might reveal. Yes, ma'am, the bailiff replied, nodding before exiting with the evidence. Monica returned to her chambers, her mind racing. Jason Marlowe wasn't just a cocky criminal, he was a dangerous one. She pulled up his case file on her secure computer, reviewing the details of his crimes again. His reach had been extensive. Government databases breached, financial institutions crippled, individuals' lives ruined through stolen identities. Yet, despite the mountain of evidence against him, Jason had carried himself as if none of it mattered. Why? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Agent Cooper, one of the federal investigators who had worked on Jason's case. Your Honor, may I have a word? Of course, Agent Cooper, Monica said, gesturing for him to sit. Cooper didn't waste time. That device we confiscated, it's not just some amateur gadget. Marlowe's technology is more sophisticated than we realized. Initial analysis suggests it's capable of infiltrating complex networks, even those with high-level security. Monica's brow furrowed. You're saying he could have used it for more than just escaping today? Exactly, Cooper said. If he had activated it successfully, he could have accessed sensitive court records, tampered with evidence files, maybe even compromised ongoing investigations. This wasn't just about escape, it was about chaos. The weight of Cooper's words settled over Monica. Jason hadn't just tried to outsmart her courtroom, he had aimed to undermine the justice system itself. Do we know if he acted alone? Monica asked. Cooper hesitated before answering. We're not sure yet. But based on his history, it's likely he has collaborators, or at least people who've benefited from his crimes. Monica nodded, her jaw tightening. Then we need to act quickly. If there's a larger network, I want them dismantled. Can you coordinate with cybersecurity experts to track any connections his device might reveal? We're already on it, Cooper assured her. But Your Honor, I'd advise you to be cautious. If Marlowe has allies, they won't be happy about today. I appreciate the warning, Monica said, her voice steady. But my job is to ensure justice is served, no matter the risks. Meanwhile, in a secure facility across town, Jason sat in an interrogation room, flanked by 2 federal agents. His confidence had been shaken, but traces of his arrogance remained. You don't get it, do you? Jason said, leaning back in his chair. You can lock me up, but you'll never stop the system. People like me? We always find a way. One of the agents, a gruff man in his 40s, leaned forward. People like you end up in prison, Marlowe. Your system isn't as bulletproof as you think. Jason smirked. Oh, I don't mean me specifically. I mean the ones out there who are smarter, faster, better. You think I'm the end of this? I'm just the beginning. The agents exchanged a glance, but Jason's words weren't lost on them. If he was telling the truth, the justice system might be dealing with more than one rogue hacker. Back in her chambers, Monica took a moment to reflect. She had faced her fair share of challenging cases, but Jason's felt different. It wasn't just about the crimes he had committed, it was about the message he was trying to send. People like Jason thrived on the belief that the system was fallible, that they could exploit its weaknesses. Today, she had proven otherwise, but she knew the fight wasn't over. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was her clerk, carrying a sealed envelope. This just came in for you, Your Honor, the clerk said, handing it over. Monica opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. You won today, but the game isn't over. Watch your back. Monica's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. She folded the note and placed it in her desk drawer. Threats like this weren't new to her, but they were never taken lightly. Thank you, she said to her clerk. Ensure this is reported to security. Yes, Your Honor. As the clerk left, Monica stared out the window of her chambers, the city skyline glowing in the evening light. Jason Marlowe had failed, but his arrogance had revealed a larger problem. There were others like him, people who believed they could manipulate the system and escape accountability. But Monica Hayes wasn't afraid. If today had proven anything, it was that justice, when upheld with vigilance and resolve, could withstand even the most sophisticated attacks. As she prepared to head home, Monica knew one thing for certain: the fight wasn't over. And she was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was silent as Jason Marlowe was escorted back into the room, his shackled wrists clinking faintly against the metal chain. His once arrogant smirk had been replaced by a look of simmering frustration. He glanced around the packed courtroom, scanning the faces of reporters, attorneys, and spectators, before his eyes finally landed on Judge Monica Hayes. Monica met his gaze with unwavering resolve. The weight of the case, the stakes for justice, for the integrity of the law, and for her own safety, hung heavily in the air. Jason might have been the defendant, but his crimes represented something much larger, an attack on the very foundation of society. Jason's attorney rose to make a final plea. Your Honor, my client acknowledges the seriousness of the charges against him. However, we urge the court to consider his actions in the broader context of societal benefit. Mr. Marlowe's intent was not to harm but to expose vulnerabilities in the system for the greater good. Monica raised an eyebrow, her voice cutting through the courtroom like steel. The greater good, Counselor, does not include exploiting those vulnerabilities for personal gain, selling access to sensitive systems, or endangering lives. This court does not reward criminality masquerading as public service. Jason smirked again, leaning toward the microphone. You can wrap it up in whatever self-righteous bow you like, Your Honor. But the fact is, I've already proven my point. This system is broken. Monica's response was measured and deliberate. Mr. Marlowe, the system is not perfect, but it is resilient. It is built not only to endure attacks like yours but to hold those responsible accountable. The evidence against you is clear. Your intent, no matter how you frame it, does not absolve you of the consequences of your actions. She turned to the jury. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood, his voice steady. We have, Your Honor. On the charges of cybercrime, conspiracy, and attempted escape, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. A collective exhale swept through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching across notepads, while Jason sat back in his chair, his smirk fading into a hard scowl. Monica leaned forward, addressing Jason directly. Mr. Marlowe, your actions have demonstrated not only a flagrant disregard for the law but a calculated effort to undermine public trust. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Jason's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as the sentence was announced. Monica wasn't finished. However, this court recognizes that your crimes were not committed in isolation. The network you operated within and the collaborators who benefited from your actions will be brought to justice. The system you sought to undermine will now work to dismantle the very structure that empowered you. As the gavel struck, sealing Jason's fate, he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He glanced back one last time, his face a mixture of anger and defiance, but Monica didn't flinch. The fool had been exposed, and justice had prevailed. Later that evening, Monica sat in her chambers, reflecting on the day's events. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Agent Cooper. Judge Hayes, Cooper said, stepping inside. We've got them. Monica raised an eyebrow. The syndicate? Cooper nodded. The raid last night uncovered enough evidence to implicate key players across multiple states. Cypher, Jason's associate, has started cooperating in exchange for leniency. She's naming names and providing access to encrypted communications. The network is unraveling. Monica allowed herself a small smile. And Jason? He's already being processed for transfer to a high-security facility, Cooper replied. He won't be in a position to influence anything from inside. But your name came up during Cypher's debrief. They had plans to target you further. Monica's expression hardened. I expected as much. And what about the message I received? We traced it to one of their compromised servers. Cooper explained. It was meant to intimidate you, but it also gave us a digital trail straight to their leader. We're preparing a full-scale operation to bring them in. Monica nodded, her resolve firm. Good. Let's finish this. The following morning, Monica returned to the courthouse. Outside, the media frenzy had subsided, replaced by an air of quiet respect. Inside, courthouse staff and attorneys greeted her with words of encouragement and gratitude. In her chambers, she found a handwritten note waiting on her desk. It was from one of the jurors, expressing admiration for her strength and fairness throughout the trial. The words were simple but heartfelt. Your courage inspires us all. As Monica read the note, her phone buzzed. It was Cooper again. Judge Hayes, Cooper said, we've apprehended the leader of the syndicate. The operation was a success. Monica exhaled, the weight of the case finally beginning to lift. Well done, Agent Cooper. Let's make sure every one of them faces justice. That evening, Monica stood on her porch, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The fight against Jason Marlowe and his network had been arduous, but it had also reaffirmed her belief in the resilience of the justice system. Her thoughts were interrupted by a message on her phone. It was a news alert. Hacker syndicate dismantled in nationwide crackdown. Judge Monica Hayes lauded for her role in high-profile case. Monica smiled, but it was a smile of quiet determination rather than triumph. The system had held firm, and justice had been served. But she knew the fight was never truly over. There would always be those who sought to undermine the law, to exploit its vulnerabilities for their own gain. But as long as she wore the robe, Monica Hayes would stand as a bulwark against them. Because justice wasn't just a concept, it was a calling. And she intended to answer it, every time. As the night deepened, Monica sat back in her chair, a rare moment of peace settling over her. Jason Marlowe's schemes had failed, his syndicate dismantled, and the integrity of the system preserved. For now, at least, the scales of justice remained balanced. And for Monica, that was enough.